Shooting is facing scrutiny again, and we found some people who are prepared to stick their heads above the parapet to help. The candidates are out of the stalls and racing towards the 8th of July 2020 finishing line. It is the BASC Council elections. There are 11 candidates and only 3 places. In this podcast, they talk about the internal arguments facing shooting, gamekeepers, is that the right word for the profession? Should we move it on a bit? Should BASC merge with the Countryside Alliance? Lead shot, what do we think about that? Trophy hunting. And they deal with the external arguments. How do we present shooting both to the public and to the politicians? What can we do? Are you sitting comfortably?
If you just look at the signage that we put up, it's normally poachers will be prosecuted and all these sorts of things. We don't do a lot to sell ourselves to people who are out in the countryside, who we could perhaps, as I say, we need to get them on board as much, if not more, than the politicians.
Because all you ever see now in shooting organisation is birds being shot and people saying how terrible this is. People
who don't know anything about it equate guns with crime and killing people. They don't know anything about shooting sports, and they're very much in need of education about all the benefits that accrue with it.
A large percentage of the general population are not hostile as such to shooting. They're fairly indifferent towards it. It's only when something is highlighted in a way by our detractors that people will take a view. So there's a need to educate the general public as to the benefit of shooting.
My personal opinion is that I think we do make a reasonably good case. I think there is a scope to do a lot more. Just my personal view is that the court of public opinion is at best neutral to us. And I think with the broader political changes, I think there is scope for us to enhance our message, perhaps more than we have at the moment.
One of the things about shooting is approval rating in the UK is very low compared to about 95% in Denmark. We're nowhere near that. And BASC do a lot in terms of education and transferring information. I can only speak mostly from what I know, which is the BASC North office. They take a lot of children out to the moors. Thousands of children have been allowed to visit grouse keeping, and also making bird boxes and encouraging young shots to get into shooting.
I would be reluctant to see that we gave up, for example, pursuing the political agenda with politicians, but equally I think we need to do a lot more with the public in general. So, for example, at Country File Live, where I've been on the BASC stand, that's an excellent opportunity to meet people who wouldn't normally come across shooting in their everyday life.
What I'd like to see BASC doing is deploying its volunteers, who are very numerous, to have a presence at any public event where there may be an interest. Thinking of events like country shows and even car rallies. One of our council members had a BASC stand at that. Game demonstrations are very popular. There's nothing like getting people to turn up than wonderful smells wafting through the air. Even pop-up stalls, game demonstrations have been suggested, for instance, in shopping malls. And I'm sure we have lots of volunteers who would be up for that sort of thing. It doesn't have to be all down to the obviously limited number of staff that we have.
Some of the projects we've been involved in, the Game Changer project, taking game meat into schools and showing school children how to prepare and to cook it. Again, that is part of the educational programs that we're involved in. Obviously, with the COVID-19 situation, that's had to be stopped. But prior to that, that was something that was getting children involved, and in turn was bringing their parents on board. What we're finding, people were coming to us where they through their children's involvement and wanting to find out more.
What I think we do have to have is the very intense discussion as to where we feel we're going to get the maximum exposure, and that will be a sustainable and long-term exposure for the benefits of what we do. And I think that will change over time. We may have a program that goes for one thing at one point, and we may redirect that at another time. But I think what I'd like to see is a little bit more activity in that area.
You could try and get into schools, you could try and go in through cadets, you could encourage broader membership of the organisation to strengthen your lobby and therefore have more targeting power with the MPs. Perhaps we could encourage, family memberships, so cut the prices, extend the benefits, get more people on side, and then look for some different channels to put the messages through. I think what you've got to do is to try and stay off other people's negotiating arenas and define your own ballpark. Get some facts together, make sure you know what your message is, and then start pushing it out to people rather than reacting to their messages, because otherwise you're always on the back foot and reactive, and that's just not a good place to be.
I'm particularly interested in the mental health benefits of shooting, but we have game as food, we have crop protection, livestock protection, we have healthy outdoor exercise. You can do it with your friends or you can do it by yourself. You don't have to be fighting fit. You can carry on doing it until you're quite advanced in years. And overall, it's a lot of fun.
Well, one of the other things that I think BASC needs to do is it's got to counter the Chris Packham style of what he calls conservation. And as part of my candidate statement, I think that shooting, whether it's BASC or several organisations, need to foster flagship sites like all of the RSPB sites like Shaftesbury, Collaborate, Slimbridge, all those sites, and have similar sites on shoots where the general public can get access, can be given guided tours, that sort of thing, to actually improve the image, get much better PR, and then you would get the TV makers in and get them making programmes that are much more sympathetic about shooting.
Do people on council see the comments on social media about the organisation? Are them comments coming through? Because if you spend 10 minutes on your phone and have a look around, some of the comments aren't good, especially after the lead issues and then wild justice. But I think there's also a bit of education needed where members think that everybody knows what wild justice and organisations like that are doing. But the truth of it is, if like for instance, if me and you fell out and me and you went to court, there'd only be me and you that knew about we'd fallen out, wouldn't there? So I think there's a bit of education on that side that needs putting forward.
I think there's an awful lot of misconceptions as to what shooting does in the public's mind. I think particularly around the conservation area, I feel there could be a lot more research and a lot more publication as to what is going on and why that enhances the more general biodiversity, which we benefit from.
You get people who will complain about noise of clay pigeon shoots on a Sunday morning and things like that. We need to move away from that and actually start pointing out a lot of things that are going on. And you get snippets of it, but things like what's been going on with lapwings and what work that's been done around woodcock, there's so much that is going on. And we get support from the farming community, but we don't ever seem to get into the general population.
All the raptors are being artificially fed with roadkill, with farm refuse and all that kind of thing. So they have a much higher population in this country than they should have, and therefore longbird populations decline. And we should be doing a lot more by looking back at the way populations of birds in this country have declined, mostly, and others have increased. And the numbers are all there, you can get them all, and we should do a much better job of publicising that, so that people can see that raptor control, for example, is going to be crucial for the future.
I think the thing that's forgotten about BASC is shooting and conservation. And we need to really promote the conservation because there are people out there who do see the benefits of conservation. What they don't realise is that shooting and conservation go hand in hand.
Personally, I get the feeling, and for people I speak to who are non-shooters, they don't really understand what it is it's all about. And what they do understand is unfortunately quite often prejudiced by photographs. And we've all seen the very unfortunate picture that gets in the press. And unfortunately, that creates a huge amount of emotional pushback that we then have to fight against.
One of the advantages BASC has got is the regional offices and picking things up locally. They're very good at doing that with the MPs. not so good with local authorities, and not at all in local papers, Facebook pages or Twitter.
BASC is managed regionally. That's the first thing people have to realise. There are regional offices and officers that conduct these activities. So it is important that the membership identify where these offices are and make contact with the regional officers. So if you've got children, family members that you would like to take part in shooting or acquire new skills, the first port of call would be your regional officers. So there's a lot of activity that they engage in every year in terms of game fairs, country fairs. There's a lot out there in which anybody who's got any interest in shooting a field sport can pick up, but that's only managed by the regional officers for most part. And I think that's the information that needs to get out. You must identify your regional officers to get involved.
The people who get elected are elected on behalf of the people. So the people elect the politicians. And if we don't educate both, we get the politicians that we deserve, generally, but I'm afraid to say. But the thing is, we also need to educate the electorate as well as those people who they're electing.
How BASC is attacking government or talking to government, I don't think we know, do we? We don't see that. We don't get an update. Sometimes you do get a little snippet in magazines and things like that, but you don't. I think a lot of people on kind of like the cold face on this just bare membership, they do think that BASC don't do anything.
I mean, I don't remember or recall seeing adverts in national newspapers and things like that. I think they need to have a much better PR and more investment in that side of things, because that's what's going to win the argument in the end, is actually getting the message across. I think they've got all the information. You see it all the time about how much it contributes to the economy, etc. As I say, it's just communicating that message in a professional way that the majority of the population will understand.
BASC is probably the richest shooting organisation, but it's still not super rich. We're not the NRA in the US, which also has problems anyway. But we promote a responsible image of shooting, but we're not doing enough of it. It is difficult, you're quite right, it's very difficult. But I think we should, at every stage, whenever we get a bad image of shooting from a particular organisation, BBC or ITV or whoever, we should be in there like Flint, attacking the errors that they undoubtedly will make if they're giving a bad impression. And if we don't do that, the antis get away with it. And I can say, Charlie, from 23 years in Parliament, they get away with murder.
Those are the views about how and what to educate the public. And the obvious way to do it is to use the media. Now, how to engage with the media so that it produces positive stories about shooting, well, that really gets the candidates going.
Shooting is always going to be controversial, and there are people we're never going to win over. That said, I think we can, by just putting out positive stories about there, the conservation, obviously, the disabled shooting, all of these stories that are sort of subtle ways of doing good PR for ourselves, whilst at the same time, as I say, the people who object to us are extremely vocal, and they've got a very powerful voice in the form of Chris Packham. And I think we just need to review. I'd like to see a review of how we and BASC do things, and is this currently fit for purpose?
I can see very much why, and I have in my mind, so I will briefly describe it, a picture of a country house with a large number of dead birds in front of it, and that's what the headline is written about. I'm not convinced that is necessarily the most potent advertisement for what we do, because behind that, of course, and I was thinking about this the other day, behind that photograph is a vast amount of stuff that is never portrayed in that 1 second snapshot. All the work that goes on in conservation, as I said beforehand, all the activity, the employment, right the way through to how that meat finds its way into the food chain.
I think we've struggled to even present, let alone win an argument with the public in terms of what we do. I think the nearest we got was last year with the general licence, and there was some very good publicity then in the papers with regard to the damage that was being done, particularly with lambs and crows, but also crops. And I think we won that argument, but more because of what the investigative journalists got hold of and did for us. Although that was, of course, supported by BASC.
BASC does a good job of addressing issues as and when they're brought up by other people, but it tends to be, in my view, a bit too reactive. I think there's more that can be done, and I think if we're going to win some of these arguments going forward in the future on these key issues, we're going to need to get on the front foot a bit more. So I'm delighted, for example, that BASC intervened in the wild justice challenges and all that kind of thing.
Because when we talk about numbers of people employed and shooting being worth however many billion we come up with, I think it would be more useful to sort of say, look, we are the equivalent of a direct comparison, saying, as many people shoot as, I don't know, go to 5 football games or something, to put it into a language that people can understand better, rather than, why not rank ourselves, rather than saying, we're a mass participation sport, why not actually rank ourselves, so that people can see we're, I don't know, bigger than hockey, bigger than cricket. And it's all those things, I think, that can really hit home to people, rather than just talking about numbers and talking about 3,000 gamekeepers. To be honest, I don't really know what that means. Well, I do know what it means, but it's sort of, can the public understand it? And are we presenting it in the right way? Is my point.
I would go and look at our constitution. Section 2, role and objects: act as the national representative body, promote and safeguard, responsible unification, uphold and maintain legitimate interests. So for me, that is actually out there as what we're about. First 4 points in our objects.
I think BASC needs to put a lot more stuff out using its own, be it YouTube, Facebook, and then hopefully for every 100 items you put out, the press will pick up 2 or 3 which they're interested in. You have to put an awful lot in to get a small amount out, but that overall, the benefit is then that you raise the public view of it. Obviously, the antis and people will monitor everything that goes out. It needs to be very carefully done and very professional. But a lot of things would hopefully get picked up by local and national media.
My point of view would be it should definitely be producing more material. A lot of people don't even know there is a YouTube channel for BASC. There's a lot of press releases, but there is definitely a breakdown in communication, and that often information is not transferring between the association to the membership. And I think the cartridge gate or lead issue is one of them. So I think they have started doing more Facebook Lives for cooking and that sort of thing during the lockdown. I absolutely believe that they should generate more media and more in a more communicative manner that is useful to the membership and up to date.
We don't get a lot of BASC members or people on council even blogging and having their own YouTube and promoting stuff regularly. So you see odd bits and pieces, but we don't seem to, you've almost got to sort of go into overload to get anything to come across and get picked up.
It's a much longer conversation than what I find often is what I'd call the 2-second Twitter or social media, like, dislike. This is a big discussion about how an activity which is integral to a lot of people's lives, integral to the rural community, actually continues.
And there's an awful lot of stuff that we can do locally as well. So there's a lot of stuff in West Sussex, on the Arundel estate. There's a load of work going on there with grey partridges and what's being done to encourage them naturally. And we do get good coverage for that. There's so many more things like that we could be pulling into.
There are certainly lots of media channels and a lot of media out there where we're not necessarily the go-to voice. And I feel that what we need to do is be slightly more proactive in what our message is, particularly when something which could be controversial comes out. We really need to find ourselves as that organisation where someone picks up the phone and says, hey, what's the BASC view on this?
We get the odd bit on Country File Live, but we get as much negative as we do positive. But it's not someone that they don't come to BASC for advice in terms of all the work that we put in as part of rearing game birds and all the benefits that there are to the countryside of shooting in general.
I mean, clearly BASC isn't a celebrity, although I'm sure that we do have celebrity members, and I would like to see BASC running what you might call a celebrity engagement programme, getting people on board who are famous and who can change the public conversation. That's very powerful. And it's more possible these days, I think, possibly than ever before, given the cult of celebrity, however much one might think that in some respects that's not such a good thing.
If you've got collaboration across all the shooting bodies, then maybe there's enough money there to start making films that mainstream TV would take on. Or you would have to go and get some of these independent filmmakers who actually make these films and then sell them in to the likes of the BBC, ITV and these sorts of people, get them interested. And there must be lots of people in the shooting organisations of PR professionals. I'm not one, but those sorts of people would be a goldmine to be tapped to work out how to do all of this.
It's very good to see other shooting organisations getting involved in correcting media outlets who, talk about grey partridge threats when they're not anywhere near as serious as reported on the BBC. That sort of work needs doing, but actually I think we need to be a bit more proactive. I think people need to get on the front foot and should be pumping stuff out to media organisations. One of my things is I'm absolutely mustard keen that everything is evidence-based. I think you can't get sucked into these reactive arguments which are on a sort of moral and emotional ballpark. You need to define the ballpark with the evidence, and to do that by conditioning the arguments, by putting stuff out in a proactive way, I think is something that we should be seeing more of.
Well, most politicians get their information from the television, let's be honest, and most people get their information on guns from movies, American movies, and people shooting down a helicopter with 9mm pistols and all this kind of nonsense that you see, and it's insidious, and it also feeds into the antis, like dare I say it, the gun control network, which is a network of 3 people or whatever. Jill Marshall Andrews being probably 2 of them, but the thing is that they have a platform, and a lot of unless you've had any kind of experience of guns, there is this kind of almost insidious feeling that they are inherently dangerous.
In terms of mainstream, it has to be something that's not seen as an elitist sport. It has to be accessible, and I think one of the things that BASC has done, if you look at the composition of council, where we now have a number of female council members in line with board structures across the UK, female membership has been the fastest growing category. We are reaching out. Certainly we could do a lot more in terms of inclusivity, but it is important that shooting's seen as available to anyone.
And personally, I don't necessarily see that shooting will ever be mainstream. If we talk about this as the same as football or something of that nature, I think it's always going to be one of those activities that some people do, archery, croquet, or something of that nature. I think shooting has always had a very strong role within the countryside. I think it's always played a big part in the way in which many people socialise. I think it's powerful and potent to protect that.
I am an advocate for diversity and making shooting more accessible to women, those from working class, and all the ethnic minorities you can think of. So my viewpoint would be shooting has, and I've always said it, has an image problem, and it's definitely one they should mitigate.
The way I would put it is, for the future of a healthy sport and a healthy industry, BASC should definitely, along with all of us, be seeking to broaden its membership and the interest in shooting and conservation in our country generally. So I think that's for the good of all of us, for the countryside, for everyone who enjoys it, and for those who wish to shoot in it and work in it as well.
We have to educate people. we can't educate them by just putting our heads in the sand. We've got to get out there. We've got to spend money. BASC does a lot of really good stuff, but I think we just don't do enough of the stuff that's going to keep shooting going.
If it did more in conservation, it would get more sympathy with non-shooting people, which would then protect it. And I can think of a number of ways that it could do that. And it could also broaden its base then out into the wider public and have members who are non-shooting members, for example. So it could have a conservation membership that doesn't necessarily shoot, but supports conservation alongside of the shooting community, which does a huge amount, which most of the general public don't even understand, and just see as, particularly in urban areas, see shooting people as part of the problem, not part of the solution.
We have lots of wonderful facilities, some of which, I would not argue with. The firearms offices, we need insurance, we need all that being done. But a lot of it is icing on the cake. And if we don't spend the money on promoting shooting, which is the number one issue that in our aims, if we don't spend enough money on doing that and not promoting it to people who are going to make decisions, both in the devolved assemblies and the Parliament, if we don't do that, it'll just be the icing. We won't have the cake anymore. And I really believe that.
We don't have the same sort of culture as America. I think the UK culture is a little bit more circumspect about these aspects, a little bit more conservative with a small c. I think it's tolerant. I think it is respectful, but we have to continually earn and reinforce that respect of what we do and how we do it in a manner of integrity.
That's their views on how to deal with the public. You lobby politicians in a different way. Politicians want votes. They want evidence. And when it comes to making laws like bans on guns or shooting or hunting, they are prepared to ignore headlines. Now, Martin Jones, who has been on BASC Council and is seeking re-election, was an MP for nearly a quarter of a century.
Most politicians never come across it. They don't know anything about it. I mean, I did, because I was brought up in a fairly rural area. I used to go shooting on my own call, and then I got into target shooting when I was about 13. So I've been in it for years. So I had the words when some people came to me complaining about an issue or beset by the people, the antis, who for 23 years, I know exactly the tricks they get up to, and I had that for 23 years. And I had the words to say back to them, say, well, do you know about this? Do you know about predators? Do you know the fact that if we don't control predators, we don't have a lot of the birds and creatures that you like? So I had the words, and I was able to do that. An awful lot of politicians don't, and they also have their own prejudices. Or they might be married to somebody who is very anti-shooting. They have pressures, which we, can do something about, but we have to do it in the constituency. We have to do it before they get elected.
Politicians generally make decisions based on their mailbag. I think there's a lot more we can do if we value shooting. We really want to keep it, that we have to do in communicating, letting politicians know how we feel about it. But not just about our feeling, it's about the value we add. And there's a wonderful report in 2014 about the value of shooting. There's a huge amount that the whole activity of shooting, from game through to conservation, through to social, adds to the wider community. That's, I think, a very powerful message.
I mean, if BASC goes to somebody in Parliament who is anti-shooting, the letters go in the bin. I mean, that's just the way it is. And we have to get to them as constituents. And BASC's job should be, in my opinion, and it's been something I've been pushing in the last term, that we should be getting them to be educated by shooters' voters in their patch. They'll listen to them in their patch.
At the moment, it's just by 1,000 cuts. And basically, we're getting, I think, civil servants imposing ever more regulation on us, and politicians not having the courage to stop them doing it, because they see a rather small organisation with 150,000 members, and then people like the RSPB, talking in their other ear, and they've got a vastly bigger membership than the BAC has, for example.
BASC does the best job at Westminster. One of BASC's strongest suits actually is politics and lobbying. I think that's where they perform the best. I think the problem actually is on how to communicate that progress back to the membership. I think that's where the perception arises. I think BASC are definitely on top of the game when it comes to legislation, politics, and Westminster.
All the time I was in Parliament, and Chris de Graffius was there talking to us as members of Parliament, and doing a pretty good job at that level. The problem is, it's too late then. I think we should be getting at politicians at all levels, and not just members of Parliament, but during the process of them becoming politicians, giving them the knowledge of shooting and what it means to us and what it means to the economy and what it means to the countryside. That shooting, A, is necessary, B, it's enjoyable, and all the benefits of shooting to these people.
Politicians are fickle creatures. They listen to their electorates. If they sense that people don't like things, then they start to go about weak at the knees. If you can win people over with the right arguments, with the evidence to show the benefits for conservation, for the country, for employment, and frankly, for the fun of the sport, we shouldn't shirk or shy away from that. There's nothing wrong with the responsible enjoyment of shooting guns. There just isn't. And that's something that needs to be said. And we should all be quite confident to stick our chins out and say that. Otherwise, we're going to lose the argument.
Well, it was my pushing that got the budget for those part-time political officers. Only part-time, but they were out in the regions, and they were people who knew how to deal with politicians. They were from all different parties and various areas, but I selected them, helped to select BASC on when we engaged them, looking for people with experience that can do that. Now, the problem is they're only temporary. I want to see that being done in every region, and a lot more of it, and involving the normal work that people in the regions do, the regional directors, where you have young shots. Why don't we invite the local councillor, the local MP, to go and see how good it is and how much they're enjoying it? And it's still not happening. And that I want to keep pressing for that, because it's the only way to go, Charlie. It really is.
Well, I was very much behind Martin when he mooted the possibility of having political officers to work at local level. That's one of the reasons why I stood for council 5 years ago, because there was a lot of discontent and dissatisfaction. BASC isn't doing this, BASC isn't doing that. It's all very well, we've got to have representation at the highest level in Westminster, but an awful lot of politics happens at local level with county councils, city councils, MPs in their constituencies, and local opinion leaders and influencers. So BASC did appoint a number of political officers at that time. Their remit was essentially the general election, which was coming up. I would certainly like to see more boots on the ground in political terms, people who have the background and the experience to lobby at a local level, so we don't see things like Bradford Council not renewing the lease on the local moorland, so we don't see Liverpool Council banning shooting events within their jurisdiction. This is all very, very bad for shooting sports, and we need to have a more dispersed enabling presence, I think, across the whole country.
A lot is now going on, particularly with the police, in terms of setting up rural crime units, and that seems to be working much better.
I can only speak from my understanding in terms of the Northern Ireland situation. We have an all-party group at Stormont, which is chaired by Patsy McGlowan, who is a very keen supporter of shooting sports. Now, we have, apart from two parties, the Green Party and the Alliance, we have cross-party support, and we do have access. I would actually say, I suspect it's actually better than at Westminster. Our office in Northern Ireland is beside the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party office. and we have the minister. His office is next door. You know, I was able to go there for meetings in relation to the general license issue. We at a local level in Northern Ireland, we do have a lot of political influence, and it has been used to good effect.
Us, as members of the public, shooting members of the public, should be talking to politicians in their own area. That's when they're at their most vulnerable, shall we say. They're going to learn there.
Those are the external issues, what the great ship of shooting looks like when it's in full sail. Now let's look at the internal issues, where that ship is heading. Issues such as trophy hunting, the lead ban, whether BASC should merge with the Countryside Alliance, and first, how to deal with the RSPB as it turns its guns on gamekeeping.
They should always be fighting for gamekeepers. You know, they are, you know, the front line, so to speak. You know, the area of conservation is immense, and it's all to do with gamekeepers. They should absolutely be fighting for gamekeepers. Absolutely.
Many gamekeepers might well be sort of throwing things at the screen now, what I might say. But I do think, you know, there's an argument that we have to be prepared to look at our roles, and language and names can quite often carry quite a lot of value with it. And it may be a time to look at that and say, you know, is it, let's look at what gamekeepers do. A huge amount of their day is spent actually doing conservation. You know, and then we look at all the data, you know, we look at the millions of man hours done, you know, that is the whole backbone, the platform on which everything rests. So, you know, it is up to that profession if it wants to change its name. My view is that you could well take a stance and say it's about time to have a little bit of a shift and really promote that, you know, this incredible work that we do over the, you know, hundreds of thousands of hectares of land where we are maintaining the biodiversity of it.
Certainly explore the idea of rebranding. Yeah, I'm not sure that sort of conservation manager really is the right one, because, you know, I think, again, it's sort of, let's highlight more of what they do. If it's a case of finding a more creative name, you know, I know that clay pigeon clubs have gone from clay pigeon to clay target clubs, and so yeah, well, why not look at it? I haven't got the answer, but you know, the fact is, as they are conservationists in a way, they do an awful lot of conservation. So let's push that angle, but I haven't got the right title in my head. Let's put it that way.
The gamekeeper is seen with great affection, even going back to sort of ladies chatterly lover and all the rest of it. You know, I think people understand what that is. If you start, it's like, you know, transparent wall maintenance engineers instead of window cleaners, really. I think just add more confusion.
That's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought about that, but obviously there's a lot in a name, and if we could include it in the name, a lot of what they do, which the antis couldn't disagree with, then yeah, let's change the name, call them something else, because that's what they do. A lot of their job is actually conservation.
It's a bit like my profession, where everybody gets called an engineer. You know, I mean, if everybody's called a wildlife professional, then I think it waters down exactly what they do. But sometimes some people may argue that we as wildlife professionals aren't exactly wildlife professionals, and they probably do more harm than good. My friend used to be in that type of line of work, and he's seen it on the other foot, where they come in and do some kind of management scheme and it don't work out very well. Whereas gamekeepers are a kind of, well, it's a profession, isn't it? It's like anybody's job. It's a profession, so it deserves a title, I think, and that's the title, isn't it? It's gamekeeper.
I think BASC should be fighting for all shooting, and not the sort of distinction between the two. I think there are some things that need sorting out in game shooting, and we all know about commercialisation, all the other things.
Well, let's step back. BASC, conservation, is the fourth word. And you know, that I believe is the platform upon which we can shoot. If we don't do good conservation, I personally think we've lost the argument as to on shooting.
I think you can play around with titles. One area where I do think perhaps we should change, and I in fact did write to BASC and have the letter published, I think rather than being shooting and conservation, on the magazine, they should be in the same typeface rather than shooting much larger than conservation, and maybe call it conservation and shooting. So I think, again, it's about marketing.
I think BASC needs to fight for all those who are sort of fundamental to the sport of shooting and the industry it supports. And I think it does quite a lot for gamekeepers. I think there's more that can be done. I think there's a general theme about the challenges ahead for our sport and our industry, and exposing some of those personal stories, showing the general public who don't perhaps understand the benefits that people bring to the sport and to the country, will help people to understand some of the issues better.
It is fighting for gamekeepers. We're a shooting organisation, but you probably know the history that there is a separate gamekeepers organisation. We work with them in partnership, but gamekeepers are integral to shooting sports. So yes, we will certainly support them, but they do have their own distinct organisation.
The whole context of why I applied is to try and move BASC away from where it currently is, in my opinion, which is an organisation that I think has got two issues. One is it is seen as a protection society for shooting, and I don't think the general public views it as anything else. So I think that's the first issue, and I think the second issue is that mostly it's preaching to the converted. So the only real people that are seeing all the stuff that BASC puts out and all that kind of stuff are people who are already shooting. So my whole, if you like, candidature is based on broadening BASC across the wider base of the shooting community. You know, I mean, it's something like 1 million license holders in this country, and BASC's got 150,000 members. So, you know, there's huge scope for building the organisation up to be more representative. And then secondly, it has almost no context outside of the shooting world. And so, in terms of what it's fighting for, I think it should be fighting for the whole image of field sport.
Now, some of these issues will get the BASC membership vote, but if there is one issue that collectively gets the BASC membership's goat, it's the voluntary phase out of lead shot and plastic wads over 5 years. Here's what the candidates have to say.
I probably would have pushed for it. However, I wouldn't have done it in the way that they've done it. I think there was far too little consultation with the trade. I think the statement was vague. I think they were really exposing themselves to upsetting their membership and upsetting the trade and all sorts of people for very little gain. I understand, you know, that lead has got, you know, it's been labelled as toxic, and that's something we can't get away with. But, you know, I think there are different ways of going about it. And what does 5 years mean, sort of thing? There's no targets between 0 and 5. You know, I think it was clumsy, but I understand, you know, lead seems to have its detractors. Personally, I would happily eat a pheasant shot with lead, and likewise a deer with a lead bullet. So, but then again, that's my personal view. But if the supermarkets are saying they won't have it with anything but a non-toxic shot, then that poses a problem for us, and we have to address it. So there's no hiding from you know, the changing circumstance out there.
I think it was a mistake not to communicate with the membership better, not to involve the membership in a more meaningful way. As far as even holding an emergency meeting just to elevate some of the stress and some of the issues for those where their livelihood is involved, really. So I still believe that needs to be recovered in some way. I think there's a lot of emotion up there, you know, understandably, and I think that's still something that needs to be mitigated, in my view.
I describe it in two ways. I think, first of all, the announcement that came out was accepting the inevitable. I think the way that it was done wasn't great because it wasn't a broad enough conversation. inside the shooting community, so it didn't have as much support as it should have done. And that goes back to my previous comments about getting a broader consensus across all of shooting.
I'm very proud, actually, of the way BASC, along with other organisations, took a leadership role. I think that's great. I think we could make a bit more mileage out of that. Lead has got like many toxic metals, a bad reputation. There's somewhat of an unsustainable argument to say we're going to keep pushing a toxic metal into the environment.
The membership and the trade were, ambushed, basically. I think it was probably an object lesson in poor communications with one's membership and the trade that supplies them. I don't necessarily disagree with the conclusion that was ultimately reached. I think if you're seeking to win those hearts and minds that I've talked about a little bit earlier, then the fact that we eat what we shoot is an essential argument. And if people are starting not to buy it because it contains lead, regardless of what you think of the reasonableness of the evidence for that threat, then we better start shooting with something else. But I think the way that conclusion was reached and brought about, the lack of communication was not great. And I think there's something in the way of lessons to be learned there by BASC and the other organisations that were involved as well.
I think we made a mistake by jumping both feet in on this issue. I think anybody that knows where the politicians in Europe are coming from, and we still have to deal with them, and we will still have to deal with them even after Brexit, if that ever happens. But we as BASC should not be promoting it at first.
We were told, or rather I was told, if you want to take the membership with you and stay ahead of the curve, then you really have got to take the membership with you. We weren't consulted about lead, etc. The problem with that is that the members elect councillors to act on their behalf. Lead's a bit like Brexit, you'll never get a consensus, and it was seen at the time that it was far, far better for the 9 organisations to get together and take action rather than have something imposed on us. In developments where there's a declining market for game shot with lead, all the evidence, or I would say most of it, points in the same direction, that lead is a substance which we need to avoid as much as we can.
One of the things that disappointed me about the debate on steel, for example, and I think everyone would agree that eventually we need to move towards it, is that BASC issued a policy document explaining why, whereas I would have thought personally that would have been much better as a consultation document and put out to the membership rather than the general public, and actually ask the membership for their views, including the gun trade and everybody else, and then follow that up, having taken all the feedback on board in 9 months' time, then come up with a policy document, again with the agreement with all the other principal organisations, so that we were all on the same hymn sheet. But I do think it should have been seen as a consultation rather than as a policy document from the off.
As for transitioning to lead, I can see the reasons why. It's another thing that, for instance, like Wild Justice have used that, saying that our meat is toxic because it's got lead in it. So, and lead has been banned. I mean, you can't paint something in lead paint, can you? So lead has been banned and other things, and people who work with lead have to be monitored and stuff like that. So I can see the reasons behind the lead shift, but how we bring it forward, I would probably argue that we need to. Well, the manufacturers probably won't do it because it'd be sharing secrets, but they need to get together and sort out how they're going to do the shift from lead.
Speaking from the industry side, I don't think BASC have engaged enough with, the wholesalers, the retailers, and the cartridge makers, which I think is that's how we ended up with the mess we did on the steel shop. And the fact is that, I speak to retailers speak to their retail customers, and we do actually matter, because we are, leading opinion formers, and we're a good source of feedback as well. So, I think, I would like to see a lot more engagement, and I think I can facilitate that.
I've looked at a lot of comments posted on social media. A lot of them are very negative, some of them aren't. But it seems to me, at least, to be inevitable, and also that all the issues which are raised about phasing out lead are not insuperable. We look at other countries, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of experience out there in phasing out lead, but it's something that the organisations need to work on together.
I did for many years work in the NHS and have to stand up at public meetings and put forward what we were doing, which wasn't always well received, but we did always actually have proper, full and frank consultation. And it didn't mean to say that you have to change the whole body of the document or withdraw it, but at least then you can take some of those views on board, which tempers the reaction. You may never be able to get everybody on board. That would be unachievable. And you may not even be able to get the majority on board, but at least if you can listen to some of it, you learn an awful lot through that exercise that then helps you get it through at the end of the day.
So the question, I think, is about leadership and how we want to shape that debate. And my personal view, and I think many others would say, that it is inevitable that lead shot will be banned at some point. Our question is, how do we manage that in the most effective way to take in all parties and all interests? A large part of which we were talking about earlier, I've talked a lot about research. I do think we've got to be working a lot more with the shot manufacturers. What are all the alternatives? How do we adapt those for the guns that are in existence and new firearms that may come into the market? That has got to be an evolution, but I think it's one that we can't fight against. We've got to be playing an active role with others in shaping the debate for what I believe is going to be an inevitable outcome.
Back to wildlife management, and the UK government wants to stop people from going hunting overseas, even though that's what pays for wildlife conservation. Earlier this year, it added deer stalking to its consultation on what to ban next. BASC found itself cornered into defending elephant hunters.
Well, I think trophy hunting, I agree with the BASC policy on that, actually. I think one's got to be really, really careful about starting to pontificate and to tell other countries to do what they should be doing with their game and conservation management programs when they're actually doing quite a good job. And you need to be really careful to avoid the law of unintended consequences coming into effect. I mean, what's a sporting trophy? Think about how important foreign shots are who come here and help with the cull of deer in Scotland, that kind of thing. We really don't want to make it any less attractive for people to come here because they can't take, arguably, a trophy or souvenir home with them.
We encompass all shooting sports. Everyone has their own particular sport. When it comes to trophy hunting, the media has obviously stoked up a lot of anti sentiment towards trophy hunting in relation to big game as such. Now, again, I can see the benefits where it's bringing money in to an area that can be used for conservation. But some of the things that are written about, and clearly some of them are happening, are not acceptable. But where I have a concern is if you have a blanket ban on trophy hunting, the impact that it could have on deer stalking here in the United Kingdom, where part of the process is looking towards achieving trophy heads, and it's done in a sustainable, managed way.
I don't think we've made enough of the fact that a lot of trophy hunting actually funds conservation, and that's where we should be shooting these people down, pardon the expression, shooting these people down in flames, because on the one hand they say, oh, we should have conservation, but then they're blasting people for being evil for shooting game, which is, there's probably, in the areas that they are allowed to shoot, there's probably, a surfeit of that particular, well, there should be, because that's a properly managed situation. That should be the situation. You should be paying for that in order to conserve the ones the game which we need to conserve.
With regard to trophy hunting within the UK, I think that's very different than trophy hunting abroad. And I think we are looking at legislation to prevent the import of trophies. I don't think you can, well, it'd be very difficult to legislate against people going abroad to trophy hunt, for example. And I hope the argument was put forward very well with regard to trophy hunting and what it brings in to areas like Scotland, where people come from abroad to do that. The difficulty would be if they ban the import of trophies, the impact that would have in terms of a knock-on.
I personally don't have a problem with it. I mean, I've been there. I've shot a deer. You're caught up in the moment. You know, it's just such a memorable and magnificent sort of life experience. And you know, the guy says to you, "Do you want do you want the antlers?" And of course, at that time you say yes, and then the antlers arrive 3 months later, and you think, "Oh my God, what am I going to do with these?" sort of thing. And so I can understand it, but yeah, at the end of the day, if it is so controversial, I think it's, yeah. Look, Charlie, I haven't got a firm view on it. I think generally we should, you know, it's legitimate. If someone chooses to bring home a trophy, I haven't got a problem with that. So personally, yes, I guess I'm saying we should fight to keep it. And certainly antlers from Scotland. I think, you know, there are walking sticks out there with antler tops. I don't have a problem with it at all.
I think it's pretty much a lost cause. Again, it's down to the public. I think, again, unfortunately, there's been widespread circulation of certain images, which I don't need to repeat, which are tasteless to the extreme. There's obviously the argument about the money it brings into the economy and how that goes back into conservation and breeding programs, etc., and that the beasts that are selected are unsupervised, etc. But I don't think that we've not won that argument with the public, and there's no really well-organised PR campaign to sell that. I think generally the public see that as the distasteful end of shooting.
This is something in which BASC has involved itself relatively recently. I'm convinced by the conservation benefits of trophy hunting, which of itself has numerous definitions. One could even say that, you know, picking up a shed antler on a stalk is a trophy, or taking a picture of a successful stalk is a trophy. You know, how long is a piece of string? It's that sort of argument. At the bottom of this is that if wildlife, wherever it is across the globe, has no value to the local people, then it's not going to be respected. There
are plenty of places where in Africa where elephants are an absolute nightmare for the local people, and there's nothing controlling them.
It's a question of context and how you put those arguments forward. People don't like the vision that they sometimes see of the animal lying on its side, dead. But if you talk about how it got there, why it got there, how the animal was selected, what the effect is, what would happen if that animal had not been taken, what the effect on the land would be, the herd, the fact that it's already passed on its genes into the genetic pool, etc., then you start to have a whole sort of different appreciation of what's going on and what the important points are. You can't just allow people to post a picture and then put a headline.
As regards trophy hunting in general, I do think there needs to be changes on a worldwide basis. But what I'm concerned about is emotion destroying some of the good things that's associated with trophy hunting here in the United Kingdom.
It's emotive. It appeals to people who are into something that we academics call anthropomorphism. Animals are like us. In fact, they're not. They don't have the biological mechanisms to be like us. If you give them a name, like Cecil the lion, for instance, it just multiplies the emotionality and reduces the objectivity and any semblance of common sense. So, my position on it is that if trophy hunting is responsibly carried out and it does support the local people in the areas where it takes place, I can't see much that's wrong with it. Sustainable harvesting of wildlife. There doesn't seem much from a objective, rational point of view to object to about that, but many people do, and they're very vocal.
You have to understand that shooting will always have an image problem because society is moving in a different direction. We just have to catch up. People will always have issues with trophies, particularly those not involved in shooting or are in urban environments. They just do not understand it. So it is our job to inform what trophy means and the kind of income and jobs that it brings and how it actually helps conserve wildlife and habitat. And until that information is transferred to the public, they will never understand it.
Candidates have a variety of opinions on whether there are too many shooting and countryside organisations and whether at least BASC should merge with the Countryside Alliance.
If we look at the third point in our constitution, 2C, it talks about unification. So perhaps we need to ask ourselves, should we change the constitution if we don't like that? I start from the point of view, one voice, even if it has several different colours or shades, is far more potent than having lots of different voices. And when we put one voice together, we move from hundreds of thousands to million. And that's a very loud voice. And that's the voice which I think does, you asked me earlier, that's the voice that gets the ear of politicians, decision makers, advisors. So I think we've got to start by actually, the word is used, unification. Let's work towards that. We may never achieve it, but I think we've got to constantly choose all the good things that enhance that single message from each of those interactions.
I think they've all got their place, haven't they? Like NGO, predominantly gamekeeping. I'd argue, I know Countryside Alliance does dip its toes into shooting, but I would argue that probably Countryside Alliance is more for, I think how it was born was through fox hunting, weren't it? And that type of horses and things like that. Whereas BASC, or WAGBI as it was, has always been, I would have said, for your normal shooting guy, your normal shooter. Me and you know what I mean? I'm not a gamekeeper, so I wouldn't say I would belong in NGO, although I am a member at NGO and a BASC, so I'd say I think they've all got their place.
Yes, I hear this a lot, that there should be one overall organisation. That would lose the specialist expertise, however, of BASC and its particular take on countryside matters. A merger, and I just wonder about such matters as joint membership of organisations, which could strengthen the hand of both of them without losing the particular expertise and objectives of each of them.
What you could get is each of the national councils for those organisations to actually feed up to an overall Fieldsports Council that is the one that then negotiates on behalf of everybody with organisations like government, and also try to expand the reach of field sports into, for example, we don't seem to have a very good relationship with really powerful bodies like RSPB, the BBC, and people like that, who are incredibly influential in terms of what happens to field sports.
Well, we kind of have a sort of overarching organisation now, the BSSC. I think I'd be wanting them to be a bit more proactive as an umbrella organisation. And I think those organisations we have to stick together. That's an absolute, cert. If we want to win, we've got to stick together. But I don't think the idea of sort of one body necessarily works anyway, because that's got to be the right body anyway. I'm not sure that the BASC is just yet, even if it wanted to. But however we do it, we've got to work together, Charlie. No doubt about that.
Finally, let's talk about BASC itself. Is it a comfortable club that offers game fair tickets and a bit of insurance? Or is it a street fighting, lobbying organisation, or perhaps both of those things?
I wouldn't agree it's a club. I think it is, first and foremost, it's an association. I think it's an association of shooters, conservationists, and everyone who's got interest in field sports. So I think its remit is not, although we are social, they do hold a few events. I think their remit is mostly in legislation and policy. I think that is where their strong suit is, and they should stay there, in my view.
I think it should be totally on a war footing. On BASC and the BSSC, I've been on BSSC, Shooting Sports Council, for a lot longer, because I think I've made vice chairman about 20 years ago, because they knew I was a supporter, and I've said to all the organisations on that, and at least 25 years ago, that we should be not just hoping that our particular sport is not going to get touched by the antis. I think this is what happened with the various bans that we've had. It's always been, we'll keep our heads down and we'll be all right. We will not be all right. No sport involving shooting is going to be all right unless we fight for it. And I know the way we fight for it, because I was at the sharp end. I was getting the antis, and I know how they play, and I know where we need to get to fight that. And they were, if we don't get on a war footing, then we'll lose the war.
The majority of people, if you had a poll, would say that they join a member of BASC principally for the insurance. That is great, but I would like to see a situation where they're sort of saying, I want to join BASC because of they're really fighting for shooting and really doing a great job in that area. So BASC has got the scale to provide cheap insurance, and cheap insurance is important. So, but I don't have a problem with the insurance as such, but I'd like to see people feel, more than just insurance, for sure.
Part of what BASC does is the fact that every member is insured. The alternative would be that there's legislation that you have to produce your insurance every year to a firearms officer or something. So I think the objectives are absolutely right, and I think they should be doing that. And I think that's part of what makes BASC able to push things forward, because it represents the responsible shooter.
This is why I said in my candidate statement that we have to be top down and bottom up. And bottom up is all about providing events for members. It's all about the firearms team. It's about all the advice that we can give, the expertise that we have within the BASC staff. Something else which I'd like to see BASC doing is closer links with the other countryside organisations, because they all have a remit, and if we all work together, we can get something done.
We're an UK-wide association. What we have across the UK, there's a number of social committees which at a local level would support social functions, but it's just not possible to do that on a UK-wide basis centrally. It has to be something that's devolved.
I think, it's the largest shooting organisation in the country with over 150,000 members, but there are 700,000 licence holders. So there's quite a lot of scope there to broaden the membership and therefore the power base for the lobbying we need to do for all the issues that we need to win for the future of our sport. So I think the more that you can bring people together, the more social the aspects of it, the more people will get involved, and then the stronger we'll be.
I spent a lot of my life running large organisations, and I spent a lot of time in the last 20 odd years of that developing strategy for quite big companies. And I think that's what the BASC doesn't do. It needs to work out what it looks like and what shooting looks like in 5 to 10 years' time, and then develop a longer term plan of how it gets there. So I think at the moment it's going from year to year. And typically if you do that, what most organisations do is they overestimate what they can do in 1 year and don't get it done, but they underestimate what they can achieve in 5 or 10 years. So I think a complete strategic review by the BASC would be a great roadmap which could be published and consensus achieved to take the organisation forward and as a reference point for a lot more decisions that are taken each year, like the lead ban, for example.
I also had a chat to BASC Chairman Ewan Cameron, who is not seeking re-election and who will be welcoming 3 of these candidates after the election.
Council is the sort of strategic decision-making body of BASC, so while we're not at the controls of the plane. We're not flying the plane. We dictate when it takes off, where it's going to, and monitor progress along the way. And we're also responsible for setting the organisation's strategic objectives. So among those is, we have political aspects, we have wider public acceptance of shooting. So all of these things do play into the mix. But in terms of operational execution, that's down to the experts that we employ at BASC. So the overall direction is set by Council. It's executed by the executive team.
So that's the lot. Thanks for watching. I know some of this has been as thrilling as actually attending a BASC Council meeting, but didn't we cover a lot of ground? Thanks to all the candidates who took part. Only one declined our invitation. Thanks also to BASC for using its corporate barge pole to get them all into position for us here at Fieldsports Channel to interview them. And you can still vote if you are a BASC member in the BASC Council election 2020. There's a link on the screen and in the description below. Now, I am back next Tuesday. If you're lucky enough to be part of the Fieldsports Nation, one of our merry band of 500 or so backers, you can find out how to join them on our website, link also in the description below. Otherwise, I'll see you on Wednesday, 7 PM UK time. It's Fieldsports Britain. See you then.